In this section, we're going to create the explosion part of the stink attack. As you'll recall, the stink attack is an AoE or area of effect attack. A projectile will be thrown, and when it hits, a stink hit object will be activated and it will send all of our enemies flying. I'm back in our construction scene, and before we start building the stink hit, I want to open up the VFX reference prefabs folder and grab the completed version of the stink hit to show you what we're looking for. As you can see, the stink hit has three distinct parts. The first are the clouds that come rolling out from the center. The second are these sort of dusty bits, and the third happens only momentarily. You can see that's our initial explosion. Now that we know what we're trying to make, I'm going to go ahead and delete this from the scene. And I'm going to create a new particle system by going to Create, Particle System. I'm going to rename this Stink Hit. The first part we're going to be creating is going to be that rolling fog. I'm going to start with a duration of 1 second, and I'm going to leave looping and play on awake turned on. For the start lifetime, I'm going to do a random between two constants with a value of 0.5 and 2. I'll leave the start speed at 5, and I'll leave the start size at 1. For start rotation, I'm going to do a random between two constants, and I'm going to go between -45 and 90. Now I'm also going to change the start color. I'm going to choose a darker, sort of duller color, because we really want this whole effect to look sort of dingy, grungy, darky. And so all of the colors that we're going to choose are going to be used with this sort of gray instead of white. So I'm going to choose a mid-tone gray with values all of 184. I don't want any gravity modifier, but I do want to change the simulation space to world and the scaling mode to shape. Next, in the emission module, I'm going to change it from 10 to 30. In the shape module, I'm going to leave it as a cone, but I don't really want it to be a cone. I'd really rather have it be a cylinder. I can achieve that effect by just changing the angle of the cone to 0. You can see now it just becomes a cylinder. I'm going to leave the rest of the shape properties alone. Now I don't want my particles to move so far, so I am going to add a limit velocity over lifetime. I'll leave the values of the limit velocity over lifetime module just as they are. Now to give it a sickly color, I'm going to go ahead and add a color over lifetime, and that is going to be a gradient. Now this gradient is going to be a bit unique. We want the particles not to appear and disappear, but to fade in and fade back out. But we also really want them to sort of transition colors pretty strongly. So we're going to choose some kind of contrasting colors. First off, I'm going to start with 0 alpha, and I'm going to end with 0 alpha. And then I'm going to have the alpha pick up right near the beginning so they fade in. And then I'll have the alpha just sort of fade out again right after a good period of time. So it'll fade in, stay full opacity for a while, and then just sort of fade out at the end. Now for the colors, I'm going to go ahead and start by moving my colors inward here. And the first color is going to be actually sort of a mauve or a pink color. I'm going to go with the values 255, 221, 249. Now that I've got this sort of pink color, I'm going to add another color to make a very quick transition. And that color is going to be 214, 184, 14. So you can see that transition from that pink to sort of that really kind of sickly mustard yellow. Then near the end, we're going to have one more color transition. This time I'm going to choose the color 131, 116, 94. There we go. So that's going to give our fog sort of the odd pink to yellow to dark brown transition. That's going to look really good with this fog. Next, I'm going to add a size over lifetime. And for the size over lifetime, I'm going to have a curve. And that curve is going to go between 0 and 4. Actually, I'm going to do a random between two curves. That way we get a little bit of variety. And so I'm going to go between, still go between 0 and 4. We're going to have both curves start at 0. And both curves, well, the first curve is going to go to about 4. And the second curve is going to go to just below that. So we have just a little bit of variety there. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and add a rotation by speed. And that rotation by speed is going to add to our already sort of random rotation by choosing a random between two constants with two values, negative 45 and positive 45. Now obviously we can't see the effects of these rotations yet, so now I'm going to go to the renderer and I'm going to give ourselves a new material. I'm going to click the circle selector next to the default particle material, and I'm going to choose Shaded Smoke. And there we go. So now we can see our stink clouds being emitted. The next thing we're going to add are these dusty bits to our cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by simply right-clicking on Stink Hit and choosing Duplicate. And then I'm going to nest this Stink Hit under the original. Now this new one, I'm going to rename to Gas AOE underscore Dusty Bits. The reason I duplicated our original Stink Hit and then turned it into the Dusty Bits is that they're going to share a lot of their properties, and we've already seen how to copy the particle system component, so mostly I just wanted to show you another way to do that. So here on the AOE Dusty Bits, we're going to go ahead and start changing some of these properties. I'm going to leave the duration, the looping, the play on awake. It's going to have the same lifetime, it's going to have the same speed and the same size. It's going to have the same rotation, but I am going to change the color. So to create this AOE burst effect, I'm going to go ahead and click the plus icon in the particle effects window, and I will see another particle system gets added to our Stink Hit particle effect. I'm going to rename this Gas AOE underscore burst. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the material on this so we're able to see what's happening as we work with it. So I'm going to go down to the renderer, and I'm going to change the material to Shaded Smoke. I'm also going to apply a bit of positive sorting fudge to this so that it appears behind the other particles when it needs to. Now going back to the top, let's walk through the modules. First off, we're going to reduce significantly the duration. We're going to reduce it down to 0.75. Also, I'm going to turn off looping when I'm finished, but we're going to leave it on for now so we can see the effect. The lifetime is going to be a random between two constants with a value of 0.6 and 0.35. The start speed is going to be greatly increased to 10.55. And the size will be left at 1. For start rotation, we're going to do a random between two constants with a value of negative 180 and 0. For our start color, we're going to use the same start color we used for our AOE Gas Dusty Bits, namely 108, 89, 11. We don't want any gravity, but we do want to change our scaling mode to shape. In the emissions module, we're going to reduce the emission down to 0. However, I am going to add a burst by clicking on the plus icon, and this burst is going to be a minimum and a maximum of 150. Under shape, I'm going to leave the cone, but I'm going to greatly increase the angle to 86. Now we can see the cone is bursting outwards. Next, I'm going to add a limit velocity over lifetime module. And in that limit velocity over lifetime, I'm going to go ahead and change the speed and the dampening values. I'm only going to start dampening if my speed is greater than 1.46. And I'm only going to dampen by a value of 0.46. That'll help keep the burst local to the effect. Next, I'm going to change the color over lifetime, so I'm going to go ahead and add a color over lifetime module. And the color over lifetime is actually going to use a gradient very similar to the other gradients I've been using. So I'm going to hop over to the color over lifetime module on our Dusty Bits system, and I'm going to click on the gradient editor there. And I'm just going to click New in the preset section, which will save that gradient for me. Now, when I go to the color over lifetime of my AOE burst and click on the gradient selector, I can just click on my prefab. However, the one thing I want to change is this extra keyframe. I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to press delete. You can also do Command Backspace on a Mac. So now the only difference between the two gradients is that this one fades out over a longer period of time. I'm going to attempt to give this burst a lot of random rotation. So I'm going to add a rotation over lifetime module, and I'm going to make it a random between two curves. Those curves are going to go between 250 and negative 250. So where it says 45, I'm just going to change it to 250. To really make this smoke look like it's rolling, I'm going to go ahead and start my first curve at 250, and then a little past the 50% mark, I'm going to go ahead and bring it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to add, let me turn off that size over lifetime there. Now we're back. And I'm going to go ahead and double click to add a keyframe at the very end. Now this end keyframe, I'm going to drag all the way down to negative 250. So there's a rotation and then a steep counter rotation. Now for the second curve, I'm going to start at negative 250 and end up at 0, just like that. To continue adding some chaos to this rotation, I'm also going to add a rotation by speed module. In this rotation by speed module, I'm going to change my angular velocity to 48.1. I'm going to change my angular velocity to 48.1. Now my stink burst ring is complete, and the particle effect of the stink hit is done. All I have to do now is to turn off the looping on this gas AoE burst. Since the stink hit is responsible for doing more than simply having an appearance, I need to add a script to it to make it functional. I'm going to add the stink hit script by clicking on the stink hit game object in the hierarchy and then clicking add component, scripts, and then stink hit. The stink hit wants to know what the explosion radius is and the explosion duration. I'm going to set both of those to 4. It also needs to know what it is that it can affect. Right now it's set to nothing, but I'm going to set it to shootable so that the stink hit can affect enemies. Now that that's all done, I'm going to go ahead and disable the stink hit game object. Now to see it in action, we can move the stink hit over to the enemy. I'm going to make this easy by just typing in values of 0, 0, 0 for the X, Y, and Z position. Now if I hit play and enable the stink hit, I should see that it makes my enemy run away. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my stink hit into a prefab. I'm going to go to my prefabs folder and then the VFX subfolder, and I'm going to click and drag the stink hit game object down to the project window.